Imagine standing at the edge of a great forest just before dawn. The air is cool and still. The trees rise up around you like tall, quiet giants, and everything is soft and gray in the early light. Before we go any further, if you want a brand new Earth topic every single night to fall asleep to, subscribe. One tap and a new story is waiting for you every evening. Now look down. Look at the ground beneath your feet. It does not look like much at first. A little dirt, some fallen leaves, maybe a tangle of roots pushing up through the surface. But what lies beneath your feet is one of the most alive, most complex, and most important things on this entire planet. The ground you stand on is not dead. It never was. Scientists estimate that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil holds more living things than there are people on Earth. More than 8 billion tiny organisms packed into a space smaller than your thumbnail. Bacteria, fungi, tiny animals too small to see. All of them working, all of them breathing, all of them part of something much larger than themselves. This is soil, and it is extraordinary. Soil covers most of the land on Earth. From the frozen edges of the Arctic to the warm, wet floors of tropical forests, a thin skin of living Earth wraps around our planet. That skin is surprisingly thin. In most places, the layer of rich, living topsoil, the dark, crumbly stuff where most life happens, is only about 12 inches deep. Some places have even less. That thin layer, just a foot or so of earth, grows nearly all the food that feeds every person alive today. Think about that for a moment. All the wheat, all the rice, all the vegetables and fruit and grain, nearly all of it comes from that shallow band of living ground. Soil is not just dirt. Dirt is what you brush off your hands. Soil is something else entirely. Soil is a living system. It is made of broken rock, decomposed plants and animals, water, air, and countless living creatures, all woven together over thousands of years. It takes roughly 500 years for nature to build just 1 inch of healthy topsoil. 1 inch. 5 centuries of slow, patient work by wind and water and living things. The forest floor is where you see this most clearly. Walk into any old forest, and you will notice the ground feels soft underfoot. gives a little, like a sponge. That softness is not an accident. It comes from years and years of fallen leaves, broken branches, and the remains of animals slowly breaking down into rich, dark earth. The forest feeds itself. It drops its leaves. Those leaves rot. That rot becomes food. That food feeds the trees. The trees grow, drop more leaves, and the whole quiet cycle begins again. From space, Earth looks blue. Oceans cover most of the surface, but the parts that are not blue are mostly green and brown. Those greens and browns are the forests and grasslands and soils that make life on land possible. Without healthy soil, those greens would fade. The forests would thin. The grasslands would crack and blow away. Soil is the foundation that holds the living world together. There is something deeply calming about that. The ground beneath you has been building itself for a very long time, long before you were born, long before any human being walked the earth. The soil in an old-growth forest may have been forming for 10,000 years or more, slowly deepening, slowly filling with life, slowly becoming richer and more complex with every passing season, and it is still going. Right now, in forests all over the world, leaves are falling. Fungi are spreading their thin white threads through the dark. Earthworms are pulling organic matter, the broken down remains of once living things, deeper into the ground. Bacteria are breaking down what the worms leave behind. Everything is connected to everything else in a long, slow, quiet chain. The ground beneath your feet is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of almost every story this planet has to tell. Every tree that has ever grown, every flower that has ever opened, every creature that has ever walked on land, all of them owe something to the soil. Tonight, as you settle in and let your eyes grow heavy, we are going to explore that ground together. We will go deep into the forest floor. We will meet the creatures that live there. We will follow the water as it moves through the earth and trace the long, slow path that a fallen leaf takes on its way back into the world. The ground is patient, and so are we. Soil does not simply appear. It is made, and the making of it takes a very long time. The process begins with rock. hard, bare, solid rock. The kind that feels permanent when you press your hand against it. But rock is not as permanent as it looks. Over thousands and thousands of years, wind and rain and ice work at the surface of that rock, breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces. A crack forms. Water seeps in. In winter, that water freezes and expands, pushing the crack a little wider. Then it melts. Then it freezes again. Season after season, the rock slowly gives way. This process is called weathering, and it is one of the oldest forces on Earth. What comes out of weathering is tiny fragments of mineral, the basic chemical building blocks that once made up solid stone. These fragments are the first ingredient in soil, but minerals alone do not make soil. Not yet. Minerals are just the skeleton. Soil needs something more. That something is life. When the first simple organisms, mosses, lichens, tiny bacteria, begin to grow on bare rock, they start to add organic matter to those mineral fragments. Organic matter is any material that was once alive or came from something living. Dead moss, fallen spores, the remains of a small insect. Over time, these materials break down and mix with the mineral fragments. The mixture becomes richer, more complex, more capable of holding water and supporting new life. And slowly, very slowly, something that we might begin to call soil starts to take shape. Scientists estimate that it takes between 500 and 1,000 years to form just 1 inch of healthy topsoil. 1 inch. Think about that for a moment. The depth of a thumb, the height of a large coin, a single inch of the dark, soft ground beneath a forest floor, may have taken longer to form than the entire history of the United States. That quiet layer of earth under your feet is ancient in ways that are hard to fully hold in your mind. Soil is made of 4 main things. Minerals make up the largest share, usually around 45% of a healthy soil sample. Water fills another 25%, moving through the tiny spaces between particles, carrying nutrients with it wherever it goes. Air takes up another 25% of that space. And the final 5% is organic matter, that rich, dark material made from the remains of living things. It is the smallest portion by volume, but it does an enormous amount of work. That 5% is what gives healthy soil its dark color, its soft texture, and much of its ability to support life. The size of the mineral particles in soil matters enormously. Soil scientists sort particles into 3 main groups based on size. Sand particles are the largest. You can feel them between your fingers, rough and gritty. Clay particles are the smallest, so tiny that millions of them could fit on the head of a pin. And silt particles fall somewhere in between. The best soils for growing plants contain a mix of all 3. This mix is called loam, and it holds water well without becoming waterlogged, and it lets air move through without drying out too fast. Farmers and gardeners have prized loam for thousands of years. But soil is not just a mix of particles. It is a structure. The particles clump together in groups called aggregates, and these clumps create a network of tiny tunnels and pockets throughout the soil. Those tunnels are where water travels. They are where air moves. They are where roots push through, searching for nutrients. And they are where billions of living creatures make their homes. The structure of soil is what makes it alive. Without that structure, it is just dirt. With it, it becomes something capable of feeding a forest. Every handful of healthy forest soil contains more living organisms than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, tiny insects, worms, and creatures so small they have no common name. All of them living, feeding, and dying within a space you could hold in your palm. Their lives and their deaths are what keep the soil working. They break down organic matter. They release nutrients. They build and rebuild the structure of the ground. Season after season, year after year. Soil, in this way, is never finished. It is always in the process of becoming. The rock is still weathering. The leaves are still falling. The organisms are still breaking things down and building them back up. The ground beneath the forest is a slow, steady, ongoing act of creation. And it has been going on without pause for hundreds of millions of years. One of the quietest ways soil tells its story is through color. Stand in a forest and look down. The ground is not one shade. It shifts from dark brown to pale tan to deep red to almost black, depending on where you are in the world. Each color is a clue. Each shade is the result of something specific happening in the ground over a very long time. The darkest soils are usually the richest. That deep, almost black color comes from something called humus, the soft, crumbly material left behind after plants and animals have fully broken down. Humus holds water well. It holds nutrients well. It is the part of soil that makes a forest floor so productive. When you see very dark soil, you are looking at a place where life has been building up for a long time. The darkness is a record of all the living things that came before. Some of the darkest soils on Earth are found in the grasslands of Ukraine and Russia. They are called Chernozem, which simply means black earth in Russian. These soils formed over thousands of years as grasses grew and died and broke down, layer after layer, season after season. They are among the most fertile soils anywhere on the planet. Farmers have worked them for centuries. The darkness in the ground is the stored energy of countless generations of grass. Red soils tell a different story. That warm, rusty color comes from iron. When iron in the soil is exposed to oxygen and water over long periods of time, it rusts, just like a nail left out in the rain. This process is called oxidation. In warm, wet climates, where rain falls often and temperatures stay high, iron oxidizes quickly. The result is soil that glows red or orange, sometimes almost the color of a brick. Much of the soil in the American Southeast, in parts of Africa, and across tropical regions of South America carries this deep red tone. It is beautiful to look at. It is also a sign of very old, heavily weathered ground. Yellow soils are close relatives of red ones. They form in similar conditions, but with slightly less drainage. When water sits in the soil longer, the iron oxidizes in a different way, producing yellow and orange tones instead of deep red. Walk through a wet lowland forest in the American South, and the ground beneath your feet may carry that soft, golden yellow color. It is the same iron, the same process, just with a little more water in the mix. Gray and blue-gray soils are a sign of something else entirely. They form in places where the ground stays waterlogged for long stretches of time. When soil is flooded and oxygen cannot move through it, the iron in the ground changes again. It loses its red and yellow tones and turns pale, sometimes almost blue or green. Scientists call this process glaying. It produces soils that look almost ghostly, pale and cool-toned, like the color of a cloudy sky reflected in still water. These soils are common in swamps, marshes, and low-lying areas where water collects and stays. White or pale soils often contain large amounts of calcium carbonate, the same mineral found in chalk and limestone. In dry climates, where water evaporates quickly, calcium carbonate can build up near the surface, leaving a pale, powdery layer in the ground. Some desert soils have a white crust just below the surface for this reason. The dryness pulls water upward, and the minerals come with it, collecting near the top of the soil as the water evaporates away. Each of these colors formed slowly, not in years, but in thousands of years, sometimes in millions. The red soils of the tropics began forming when the climate was different, when ancient forests stood where other forests stand now, when rain fell on rock that has long since crumbled into dust. The black soils of the grasslands carry the memory of ice ages and warm periods, and the slow march of plant life across the land. Color is how the ground keeps its history visible. You do not need to dig or test or measure. You only need to look. The shade of the soil tells you what minerals are present, how much water moves through it, how much life has passed through it, and how long it has been forming. It is a record written not in words, but in iron and carbon and time. The ground beneath the forest is not one thing. It is many things, shaped by many forces, over an almost unimaginable stretch of time. And all of that history shows up quietly in the color of the earth. Soil is not a single thing. It is a stack of worlds, one resting on top of another, each with its own color, its own texture, its own story. Scientists call these layers horizons, and each horizon tells a different part of the ground's long history. The very top layer is called the O horizon. The O stands for organic, which which means it comes from living things. This is the layer you see when you walk into a forest and look down. It is made of fallen leaves, broken twigs, old bark, and the soft remains of plants and animals that have slowly come apart. In a healthy forest, this layer can be several inches thick. It is dark and soft and smells faintly of rain. Press your hand into it, and it gives a little, like a sponge. It is full of moisture and life, and it is always changing. Every autumn, new leaves fall and join it. Every season, the bottom of it breaks down further into the layer below. That next layer is called the horizon, and this is what most people mean when they say the word soil. It is rich and dark. It holds the most life of any layer in the ground. Earthworms tunnel through it. Fungal threads stretch across it in every direction. Bacteria work through it by the billions. The horizon is where roots find most of their food. It is where rain soaks in and where seeds first push their tiny roots downward. The darkness of this layer comes from humus, which is the name for fully broken down organic matter. Humus is what remains after leaves and roots, and old wood have been completely transformed by time and living things. It holds water well. It holds nutrients well. It is one of the most valuable materials on the surface of the earth. Below the horizon comes the bee horizon, sometimes called the subsoil. This layer is lighter in color. It holds less life, but it is not empty. Water moving down from above carries minerals into this zone, and over long stretches of time, those minerals build up here. Iron compounds collect in some soils, giving the bee horizon a reddish or orange tint. Clay particles settle here too, making this layer denser and harder than the soil above. Tree roots sometimes push through it, searching for water in dry seasons. But most of the living activity of the soil happens in the layers above. Deeper still is the sea horizon, which is made of partially broken rock. This is where the long, slow process of soil formation begins. Pieces of the original bedrock sit here, cracked and crumbling, not yet fully transformed into soil, but no longer fully rock either. Water and frost and the slow pressure of roots have been working on this material for centuries. It is the raw ingredient. Everything above it was once something like this. And at the very bottom, beneath all the horizons, lies solid bedrock. This is the foundation. It is the source of the minerals that give soil its character. Different types of bedrock produce different types of soil. Granite bedrock tends to produce sandy, acidic soils. Limestone bedrock produces soils that are softer and richer in calcium. The rock below shapes the forest above in ways that are quiet but absolute. Now think about where those minerals in the bedrock came from. Iron, calcium, magnesium, silicon. These elements were not made on Earth. They were forged inside stars that lived and died long before our sun was born. When those stars collapsed and exploded, they scattered their material across space. That material drifted and gathered over millions of years, pulled together by gravity, forming the young Earth. The iron that gives red soil its color was made in the heart of a dying star. It traveled through space, became part of our planet, was pushed up by tectonic forces, was slowly broken apart by weather, and now sits in the ground beneath a forest, feeding the roots of an oak tree. That oak tree does not know this, but the connection is real. The soil is not separate from the rest of the universe. It is made of the same ancient material as everything else. The same atoms that once burned inside a star now sit quietly in a handful of dark earth, holding water, feeding roots, sheltering tiny creatures, and slowly, over thousands of years, building the next layer of the living ground. Each horizon rests on the one below it. Each one depends on the one above. The whole stack works together quietly beneath the forest floor in the dark. Now think about what it takes to build all of that. Those layers of soil, those horizons stacked one on top of the other, did not simply appear. Something made them. Something is still making them right now, even as the forest sleeps above. The forces that shape soil are quiet and slow. They work across centuries, but they are powerful beyond measure. The first great architect is water. Rain falls through the forest canopy, dripping from leaf to leaf before it finally touches the ground. When it lands, it does not just sit there. It moves. It pushes into the soil, carrying tiny particles with it, dissolving minerals from the rock below and slowly pulling them downward through the layers. This process is called leaching, which means the water acts like a gentle rinse, washing certain minerals from the upper layers and depositing them deeper in the ground. Over hundreds of years, this constant movement shapes each layer of soil into something distinct. The upper layers grow lighter and more acidic. The lower layers collect the minerals that rain carried down. Water is patient. It does not rush, but given enough time, it can reshape an entire hillside. Then there is ice. In cold climates, water seeps into the tiny cracks inside rocks and then freezes. When water freezes, it expands. It grows about 9% larger than it was as liquid. That expansion pushes outward with enormous force, splitting the rock from the inside. This is called frost wedging, and it is one of the most powerful ways that rock is broken down into the smaller pieces that eventually become soil. A single winter of freezing and thawing can crack a boulder that has sat unchanged for 1,000 years. Over many winters, those cracks grow. Pieces fall away. The rock becomes rubble. The rubble becomes gravel. The gravel becomes sand. The sand becomes soil. Ice is slow, but ice is relentless. Wind plays its part too. Across open plains and high ridges where trees cannot hold the ground in place, wind lifts the finest particles of soil and carries them enormous distances. Scientists have found dust from the Sahara Desert settled on the slopes of the Amazon rainforest. That dust carries minerals the rainforest soil needs. The wind does not know it is delivering a gift, but the trees receive it all the same. Wind also strips away topsoil from bare ground, which is why roots matter so much. Roots hold the soil in place. Without them, the wind takes what water and time spent centuries building. Gravity works on soil too, though its work is slower and harder to see. On slopes, soil creeps downhill, not quickly, not in a rush, but over decades, the whole mass of soil on a hillside moves very slowly toward the valley below. This is called soil creep, and it happens even on gentle slopes. Trees growing on hillsides sometimes show a slight lean at their base, where the soil beneath them has shifted over the years. Gravity is always pulling. The soil is always, almost imperceptibly, moving. Heat also shapes the ground. In deserts, the surface of the soil can reach temperatures hot enough to crack and harden into a crust. In tropical forests, the warmth speeds up the work of every living thing in the soil, making decomposition faster and the cycling of nutrients more rapid. Temperature controls the pace of nearly every chemical reaction happening in the ground. Warm soil is busy soil. Cold soil slows down. In the deep freeze of a northern winter, the soil rests. In the warmth of spring, it wakes again. And then there is the force that most people never think about at all. The pressure of roots. Tree roots grow slowly, but they grow with tremendous force. A root pushing into a crack in a rock can exert enough pressure to split that rock over time. Roots reach down into the subsoil, the layer below the rich topsoil, and break it apart. They pull minerals up from deep in the ground and carry them toward the surface in the form of leaves and wood. When those leaves fall and decay, those deep minerals become part of the upper soil. Roots are not just passengers in the ground. They are active shapers of it. All of these forces, water, ice, wind, gravity, heat, and roots, work together without any plan or direction. They simply follow the rules of the physical world, and yet the result of all that work is something extraordinary. Rich, dark, living soil. The kind that smells like rain. The kind that crumbles softly in your hand. The kind that holds an entire forest up. Beneath that rich, dark soil, something else is happening. Something vast. Something so large it barely fits inside the imagination, and yet so thin and delicate you could destroy it with a single footstep without ever knowing it was there. Fungi live in the soil. Most people picture a mushroom when they hear that word. A small brown cap pushing up through wet leaves after a rain. But the mushroom is only the smallest part of the fungus. It is like seeing the tip of an iceberg and thinking that is the whole thing. The real body of a fungus lives underground, spreading outward in every direction through the soil in threads so thin they are nearly invisible. These threads are called hyphae, and they are each far narrower than a single human hair. Now Here is where the scale becomes something worth sitting with quietly for a moment. A single teaspoon of healthy forest soil can contain several miles of these fungal threads, all coiled and woven through the dark earth in a space smaller than your thumbnail. Several miles in a teaspoon. If you stretched out all the fungal threads from just one small handful of forest soil, they might reach from one end of a city to the other. Scientists have confirmed this through careful laboratory measurements, counting and measuring the threads under microscopes. The numbers are almost too large to hold, and those threads do not stop at 1 teaspoon. They spread. A single fungal organism can extend its network of threads across an entire forest floor. One species of fungus in Oregon, called Armillaria osti, has been measured, covering more than 2,000 acres of ground. That is roughly the size of 3,000 football fields, all connected as one single living thing. It is considered one of the largest organisms ever discovered on Earth. Scientists believe it may be thousands of years old. The threads of fungi do something remarkable. They connect to the roots of trees. The two grow together. The root and the fungal thread intertwining so closely that they share nutrients. This partnership is called mycorrhiza, which simply means fungus root. The tree sends sugars down through its roots to feed the fungus. The fungus, in return, pulls water and minerals from the soil and passes them back to the tree. Neither one could thrive as well alone. But the network does not stop at a single tree. The fungal threads spread from one tree's roots to another's, then to another. They connect dozens of trees across a forest into a shared web of exchange. Nutrients can flow from a large, healthy tree to a small, struggling seedling growing in the shade. Scientists have watched this happen in careful experiments, tagging the carbon atoms inside a large tree, and then finding those same atoms later inside a young tree nearby, carried there through the fungal threads. The forest does not compete the way we sometimes imagine. It shares. Some researchers call this the wood wide web, a name that captures something true about how it works. Information, or at least the chemical signals that act like information, can travel through these fungal networks When a tree is attacked by insects, it can release chemical signals that travel through the network and reach neighboring trees. Those trees then begin producing defensive compounds in their own leaves before the insects even arrive. The forest responds together. The scale of all this is genuinely hard to picture. In 1 acre of healthy forest soil, the total length of fungal threads can reach into the hundreds of miles. Hundreds of miles, running silently beneath a single acre of ground. You could walk across that acre in a few minutes. Beneath your feet the whole time, that quiet network would be carrying water, minerals, and sugars in every direction, connecting roots to roots, feeding the young, supporting the old. Fungi are not plants. They are not animals. They belong to their own kingdom entirely, as distinct from a tree as a tree is from a wolf. And yet, they have woven themselves so deeply into the life of the forest that the forest could not function without them. Remove the fungi from the soil, and the trees begin to struggle. The seedlings fail to establish. The minerals stop moving. The whole system slows. This is the hidden scale of the forest floor. Not just the trees you can see, reaching upward into the light. Not just the leaves and the bark and the roots you might notice if you knelt down and looked, but the invisible threads running beneath all of it, connecting everything, carrying the quiet work of the forest from one living thing to the next, in the dark, in the cold, without pause, without rest. And yet the fungi are not alone in that dark, quiet world beneath your feet. Something else moves through the soil. Something you can see if you dig carefully and look closely. Something ancient and slow and extraordinary. The earthworm. Pick up a handful of rich forest soil and hold it gently. If you are lucky, you will find one curled in your palm. Its body is soft and ringed, a deep reddish pink, almost the color of a bruise. It has no eyes, no ears, no legs. It moves by stretching and contracting, pulling itself forward through the dark with a kind of quiet determination. It has been doing this for hundreds of millions of years. Earthworms were tunneling through soil long before the first dinosaur ever walked the earth. There are more than 6,000 known species of earthworm on our planet. They live on every continent except Antarctica. Some are tiny, just a few centimeters long. Others grow to astonishing sizes. The giant Gippsland earthworm of Australia can reach nearly 3 meters in length, about the height of a tall doorway, moving silently through the clay soils of a narrow region in the state of Victoria. You would not expect to find something that large living underground, but the soil holds many surprises. What earthworms do for the ground beneath a forest is difficult to overstate. They eat. That is the beginning of everything. An earthworm pulls organic matter into its body, dead leaves, bits of fungus, decaying plant material, and passes it through a long digestive tube. What comes out the other end is something remarkable. Worm castings, the name for earthworm waste, are extraordinarily rich in nutrients. They contain nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in forms that plant roots can absorb directly. A single earthworm produces its own weight in castings roughly every day. Multiply that across the thousands of worms living in a single square meter of healthy forest soil, and the numbers become staggering. Charles Darwin spent nearly 40 years studying earthworms. He called them one of the most important animals in the history of the world. He was not exaggerating. Darwin calculated that earthworms in England turned over tens of thousands of pounds of soil per acre every single year. They were plowing the ground, he said, more thoroughly and more gently than any human tool. His final book, published in 1881, was entirely about earthworms. He considered it some of the most important work he ever did. The tunnels earthworms leave behind matter just as much as the castings they produce. As a worm pushes through the soil, it opens tiny channels. These channels let air move down into the ground. They let water drain through instead of pooling on the surface. They give roots room to grow and spread. Soil that is full of earthworm tunnels is loose and crumbly. What farmers and gardeners call well aerated. Soil without earthworms tends to compact over time, growing dense and hard, difficult for roots to penetrate, and difficult for rain to soak into. Stand at the edge of a forest after a heavy rain. The ground there, rich with worms and their tunnels, absorbs the water quickly. The soil drinks it in. That water moves down through the channels and into the deeper layers, where it will slowly filter through stone and sediment, and eventually reach the underground reservoirs that feed our springs and streams. The earthworm, in its quiet way, helps keep those reservoirs full. There is something almost meditative about the earthworm's life. It moves through complete darkness. It has no sense of the forest above it, no awareness of the trees or the light or the seasons in any way we would recognize. It simply moves and eats and tunnels, and in doing so, it loosens the ground, enriches the soil, and makes space for everything else to grow. The roots find the tunnels. The water finds the channels. The minerals the worm releases move upward through the soil and into the plants, and from the plants into the leaves, and from the leaves into the air, and eventually back down again as rain and fallen matter, returning to the ground where the worms will eat them once more. This is the quiet rhythm of the forest floor. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady and ancient and endlessly patient. The worm does not know it is part of something larger. It does not need to know. It simply does what it has always done in the dark, beneath the roots, beneath the fungi, beneath the leaves, beneath your feet, turning the soil of the world one small passage at a time. And yet, the worm is not alone down there. In the same darkness, in the same rich crumble of soil, there are workers so small that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil holds more of them than there are people on Earth. Scientists estimate that 1 teaspoon of good soil can contain up to 1 billion bacteria. 1 billion. In a space you could hold between 2 fingers. Bacteria are among the oldest living things on this planet. They were here long before the forests, long before the worms, long before anything with eyes or legs or roots. They have been breaking down matter and cycling nutrients through the earth for billions of years. In many ways, the soil we walk on is their creation as much as anything else. They are invisible to us without powerful tools, but their work is everywhere. Bacteria in the soil break down dead plant material, releasing the nutrients locked inside. A fallen leaf lands on the forest floor, and within days, bacteria have already begun to take it apart. They dissolve the soft parts first. The sugars, the starches, the easy material. What remains takes longer, but the bacteria keep working. Slowly, steadily, they reduce that leaf to its smallest parts and return those parts to the soil. Some bacteria do something even more remarkable. They pull nitrogen directly from the air and fix it, which means they convert it into a form that plants can actually use. Nitrogen is everywhere. It makes up about 78% of the air around us, but plants cannot simply absorb it from the atmosphere. They need it delivered in a different form, and certain bacteria do exactly that. These nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in the soil, and sometimes inside the roots of plants themselves, working in a quiet partnership that has sustained forests and grasslands for hundreds of millions of years. Without them, the soil would slowly lose its fertility. The plants would struggle. The trees would thin. The whole forest would feel the absence of something it could never quite name. There are also bacteria called decomposers that work alongside fungi to break down the toughest materials in the soil. Lignin, the hard, woody fiber that gives trees their strength, resists most things, but certain bacteria produce enzymes, which are tiny chemical tools that can slowly break lignin apart. This process releases carbon that has been locked inside wood for years, sometimes decades. That carbon moves back into the soil and eventually back into the air, where plants will capture it again through their leaves. The same carbon atoms cycle through wood and soil and air and leaf over and over across centuries. Deeper in the soil, conditions change. Oxygen becomes scarce. The light is long gone. The temperature drops and stays low. Many bacteria cannot survive here, but others thrive in exactly these conditions. These are the anaerobic bacteria, meaning bacteria that live without oxygen. They use different chemical processes to break down matter, and some of them produce methane as a byproduct. Wetland soils and waterlogged forest floors release small amounts of methane because of this microbial activity deep in the ground. It is a reminder that even the chemistry of the atmosphere is shaped, in part, by what happens in the dark below our feet. Some soil bacteria produce natural antibiotics, which are substances that stop the growth of other harmful microbes. The antibiotic streptomycin, which has saved countless human lives since its discovery in the 1940s, was first found in a soil bacterium called Streptomyces griseus. The soil has been producing its own medicines for millions of years. We only recently learned to look for them. There is something humbling about this. The ground beneath a quiet forest holds chemistry and biology of extraordinary complexity. We walk across it and feel only the soft give of the earth under our shoes. But below that surface, in the dark and the damp, bacteria are fixing nitrogen and breaking down wood and producing compounds that shaped the history of medicine. They do not rest. They do not pause for seasons. They simply work as they have always worked, in numbers too large to fully imagine. The earthworm loosens the soil and lets the air and water in. The fungi reach outward and connect the roots of trees. And the bacteria, invisible and ancient and endlessly busy, take what has died and return it to the living. Each one depends on the others. Each one makes the others possible. The deeper you go into the soil, the more you find. And the more you find, the clearer it becomes that what looks like simple dirt is anything but. And then the leaves fall. Every autumn across the forests of the world, something ancient and unhurried begins. The trees pull back the green from their leaves. The chlorophyll, that bright chemical that captures sunlight and turns it into food, drains away. What is left behind are the yellows and oranges and deep reds that were always there, hidden beneath the green. The leaves glow for a little while, then they let go. A single large tree can drop as many as 200,000 leaves in one autumn season. They drift down slowly. They settle on the ground in soft, overlapping layers. They pile against roots and rocks and fallen branches, and then the work begins. This is the art of decay, and it is one of the most important processes on Earth. Decay sounds like an ending, but it is really a beginning. When a leaf falls and lands on the forest floor, it carries with it everything the tree pulled from the soil over the course of a year. Carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, all of it locked inside the leaf's thin walls. The job of the forest floor is to unlock it. The first workers to arrive are small, springtails and mites, tiny creatures no bigger than a grain of sand, begin to chew the leaf into smaller pieces. They do not digest all of it. They simply break it apart. This matters enormously. A smaller piece of leaf has more surface area. More surface area means more room for the next wave of workers to get to work. Those workers are the fungi and bacteria from the sections before. They move in quickly. They coat the torn edges of the leaf with their filaments and enzymes, the chemical tools that break large molecules into small ones. Slowly, over weeks and months, the leaf loses its shape. It softens. It darkens. It begins to look less like a leaf and more like the soil beneath it. This process is called decomposition, and it runs on a cycle as reliable as the seasons themselves. The speed of decomposition depends on the leaf. Not all leaves break down at the same rate. Oak leaves, with their thick waxy coating, can take 2 years or more to fully break down. Maple leaves are softer and thinner and may be gone in a single season. Scientists have found that the chemistry of the leaf itself controls how fast it decays. Leaves with more nitrogen break down faster. Leaves with more tough, fibrous material called lignin take much longer. The forest floor is always processing a mix of both, at different speeds, in different layers. Beneath the fresh fallen leaves, there is a layer of partially broken down material. Scientists call this the duff layer. It is soft and dark and smells faintly of earth and mushrooms. Below that is the layer where the oldest material has broken down almost completely into humus. That rich, dark, crumbly substance that holds water and nutrients and gives healthy soil its deep color and its life. It takes roughly a year for a single leaf to move from the top of the pile to the humus layer below. Multiply that by 200,000 leaves per tree. Multiply that by every tree in a forest. The forest floor is processing an almost unimaginable amount of material. All the time, year after year, in a cycle that never fully stops. Even in winter, when the forest looks still and cold and quiet, decomposition continues. It slows down. The cold reduces the activity of bacteria and fungi. does not stop. Beneath the snow, in the frozen-looking duff, the work goes on at a quieter pace. The cycle simply breathes more slowly for a while, and then spring arrives. The soil warms, the bacteria multiply, the fungi push new filaments outward, the mites and springtails become more active. Decomposition speeds back up. The nutrients released from last autumn's leaves move into the soil water. The roots of trees draw them upward. New leaves form on the branches above. Those leaves will photosynthesize through summer, pulling carbon from the air and building new tissue. And in autumn, they will fall again. The leaf that falls this year was built partly from the leaf that fell last year, and the year before that. The forest feeds itself. It has been feeding itself this way for hundreds of millions of years, long before humans walked beneath the trees. The leaves were falling, and the soil was receiving them, and the cycle was turning quietly and without pause, the way all the deepest rhythms of the earth do. Winter changes the forest floor, but it does not abandon it. Above the ground, the trees stand bare. Their branches reach into gray sky. The light that filters down through a winter forest is thin and pale, almost silver. It falls on a floor covered in snow or frost, or the damp brown mat of last autumn's leaves pressed flat by cold and rain. To a passing eye, the scene looks empty, still, like something waiting. But the forest floor in winter is not empty. It is full of neighbors, each one adapted to the cold in its own quiet way. Beneath the snow, the temperature is more stable than you might expect. Snow is a remarkable insulator. A thick layer of snow can hold the ground beneath it at just around 32 degrees Fahrenheit, even when the air above is far colder. Scientists call this the subnivean zone, which simply means the space beneath the snow. In this narrow world, small animals live out the winter in relative warmth. Voles and shrews tunnel through it. Insects and spiders shelter in it. The snow above them acts like a blanket, holding in the faint heat rising from the earth itself. The soil is still releasing heat. Even in the coldest months, the ground holds warmth from the summer before. Deep soil temperatures change very slowly, while the surface freezes and thaws. The soil just a few feet down stays at a more even temperature. This steadiness is part of what makes the forest floor such a reliable home for so many creatures across every season. Mosses are among the most faithful neighbors of the winter forest floor. They do not go dormant the way many plants do. Mosses can photosynthesize, pulling energy from sunlight. Even on cold winter days, when temperatures hover just above freezing, they stay green beneath the snow. They hold moisture against the soil surface, protecting it from the drying effects of cold wind. A thick carpet of moss on the forest floor can reduce soil erosion, hold water like a sponge, and provide shelter for tiny invertebrates all winter long. Mosses have been doing this for an extraordinary amount of time. They are among the oldest land plants on Earth, with fossils dating back more than 400 million years. Lichens grow alongside the mosses. A lichen is not one organism, but two: a fungus and an alga living so closely together that they function as a single being. The fungus provides structure and holds water. The alga produces food through photosynthesis. Together, they can survive conditions that would kill most other living things. They grow on rocks, on bark, on the bare soil of the forest floor. They grow slowly, sometimes just a millimeter per year. A lichen the size of your hand may be decades old. In winter, they persist where almost nothing else can, adding texture and color to the pale floor of the cold forest. Beneath the leaf litter, certain beetles and their larvae spend the winter in a state of slowed metabolism. Their body processes drop to the lowest level needed to survive. They are not quite asleep and not quite awake. They are simply waiting, tucked into the duff and the soil, surrounded by the same decaying leaves that will nourish the forest come spring. The roots of the trees are still there too, of course, threading through the frozen and half-frozen soil. Tree roots do not die in winter. They simply slow their activity. Some trees continue to absorb small amounts of water, even in cold months, particularly in climates where the ground does not freeze solid. The roots stay in contact with the fungal networks beneath the soil, those long, pale filaments that connect tree to tree. Even in winter, some exchange of nutrients and signals continues along these networks, though at a much quieter pace. The forest floor in winter is a neighborhood that has simply turned down the lights. The same residents are there. The same relationships hold. The bacteria, the fungi, the mites, the roots, the mosses, the small burrowing mammals, all of them are present, all of them still connected to each other and to the soil beneath them. The cold does not break these connections. It only softens them for a season, and this is one of the most remarkable things about the living ground. It does not need warmth to maintain its community. It adjusts. It persists. The relationships between soil and root and fungus and creature are old enough and deep enough to survive cold and drought and darkness. They have survived ice ages. They have survived the slow drift of continents. The forest floor simply waits, breathing slowly, holding everything it knows until the light returns. Roots begin their lives as something almost impossibly small. A single root tip is thinner than a human hair. Yet from that tiny point, a tree can push its way through packed soil, around stones, between layers of clay and sand, sometimes for decades without stopping. The roots of a single large oak tree can spread outward more than twice the width of the tree's crown above ground. That means if the oak's branches reach 30 feet in each direction, the roots may reach 60 feet or more from the trunk. Most people look up at a tree and see the tree, but half of it, maybe more, is hidden below their feet. Some roots go very deep. The fig tree, a species that grows in dry and rocky places, has been found with roots reaching down more than 400 feet in search of water. That is deeper than a 40-story building is tall. The root was not growing quickly. It was growing with patience, following the faintest trace of moisture through solid rock, year after year. Roots do not simply grow downward. They grow toward water, toward nutrients, and away from obstacles. Scientists call this ability tropism, the way a living thing bends its growth in response to what it senses around it. A root can detect the difference in moisture between two sides of a soil particle and turn itself toward the wetter side. It is not thinking, but it is responding constantly to the world it moves through. tip of a growing root is protected by a small cap of cells called the root cap. These cells sacrifice themselves as the root pushes forward, wearing away against the soil, so that the more delicate growing cells behind them stay safe. The root cap replaces itself continuously. It is one of the most quietly heroic structures in all of nature, a shield that rebuilds itself as it is destroyed, so that the root can keep moving forward. Some of the oldest living root systems on Earth belong not to trees, but to grasses. The deep-rooted prairie grasses of North America, species like big bluestem, can send roots down 6 feet or more. These grasses built some of the richest soils on the planet over thousands of years, dying back each winter and adding their organic matter to the ground below. The dark, deep topsoil of the American Midwest, some of the most fertile soil anywhere on Earth, is largely the work of grasses and their roots over thousands of years. Roots also talk, not with sound, but with chemistry. When a tree is under stress, perhaps from drought or from insects feeding on its leaves, its roots release chemical signals into the soil. Nearby trees, connected through fungal networks, can detect these signals and begin producing their own defensive compounds before the threat reaches them. The warning travels through the ground. The forest responds as one. There is a species of tree in South Africa called the wild fig, and its roots have been documented growing through solid rock faces, splitting stone apart over time with nothing but slow, steady pressure. A root exerts a force that can exceed 100 pounds per square inch. That is enough to crack concrete. It is enough to split boulders. The root does not hurry. It simply grows, and the rock eventually gives way. In very cold climates, some tree roots grow in a shallow, wide mat just below the surface, rather than diving deep. This is because the soil below a certain depth stays frozen for much of the year. The roots of black spruce, trees in the boreal forests of Canada and Russia, spread outward just inches below the surface, threading through the thin layer of soil that thaws each summer. They are working with what they have, adapting their shape to the shape of the world around them. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about roots is how much of their surface area is invisible even to a careful observer. each root grows thousands of tiny root hairs, microscopic extensions that vastly increase the surface area available to absorb water and nutrients. A single rye plant, studied in a classic experiment, was found to have more than 14 billion root hairs, with a combined length of over 6,000 miles. That is longer than the distance from New York to London and back again, twice over. All of it hidden in a container of soil no larger than a wooden crate. The root does not announce itself. It does not reach for the light. It goes the other way, down and outward, into the dark and the cold and the pressure of the earth, finding what it needs, building what it can, quietly holding the whole living world in place from below. Water finds those root hairs first. It moves through soil in ways that feel almost deliberate, almost patient. Rain falls on the forest floor and does not simply vanish. It begins a slow, quiet passage downward, filtering through layers of leaf litter and loose organic matter before it even touches the mineral soil below. This process has a name: infiltration. It is the moment when surface water becomes something else entirely, something hidden and slow and deeply important. Soil is not solid. Even a handful of healthy forest soil is more than half empty space. Those tiny gaps between particles, called pores, are where water travels and where air lives. A well-structured soil holds roughly equal amounts of water and air within those pores, and that balance matters enormously. Tree roots need both. Soil bacteria need both. The whole living community underground depends on that careful mix of wet and open. When water enters the soil, it does not move in a straight line. It follows the path of least resistance, slipping between clay particles, threading through channels left behind by old roots and earthworm tunnels. Scientists call this preferential flow, and it means that water can move surprisingly fast through certain paths in the soil while barely touching the areas just inches away. A rainstorm can send water racing down an old root channel deep into the earth, while the soil just beside that channel stays nearly dry. Clay particles are extraordinarily small. A single clay particle is so tiny that thousands of them could fit across the width of a human hair, but their small size gives them a remarkable property: a huge amount of surface area relative to their volume. That surface area carries a slight electrical charge, and that charge attracts water molecules and holds nutrients in place. Clay-rich soils can hold onto water for a long time, sometimes too long, becoming waterlogged and dense. Sandy soils do the opposite. Water moves through them quickly, sometimes too quickly, draining away before roots can absorb it. The ideal soil sits somewhere between these two. Loam, the kind of soil that gardeners and farmers prize most, is a careful mix of sand, silt, and clay. It holds water without drowning roots. It drains without drying out. It has just enough structure to stay open, and just enough clay to stay moist. Healthy forest soils often come close to this balance naturally, shaped over centuries by the slow work of roots and fungi and decomposing matter. Water does not just pass through soil, it changes it. As water moves downward, it carries dissolved minerals with it, a process called leaching. Calcium, magnesium, and other nutrients wash slowly downward from the upper layers of soil into the deeper layers below. This is part of why the different horizons, those distinct layers visible in a fresh soil cross-section, look and behave so differently from one another. The upper layers lose minerals over time. The lower layers accumulate them. In some soils, this movement creates something striking. Iron and aluminum compounds, carried downward by water, can collect in a dense layer called a hardpan. This layer can become so compacted and cemented that roots cannot penetrate it and water cannot pass through it easily. Hardpans can form naturally over thousands of years, or they can form much faster in soils that have been heavily compressed by machinery or foot traffic. Either way, they act like a hidden ceiling underground, limiting how deep roots can grow and how freely water can drain. But water also builds. As it moves through soil, it deposits minerals in tiny cracks and spaces, slowly cementing particles together into larger clumps called aggregates. These aggregates give healthy soil its crumbly, open texture. They create the structure that allows air and water to move freely. Fungi and bacteria help build them too. releasing sticky compounds that bind soil particles together. The whole architecture of the soil is partly a product of water's long, patient movement through it. There is something deeply calming about imagining all of this happening right now. Beneath every forest floor on Earth, rain falling on a canopy of leaves, dripping from branch to branch, reaching the ground softened and slowed, soaking into the litter layer, filtering down through the dark, through the root hairs and the fungal threads and the clay particles with their quiet electrical charges, moving through channels carved by worms long gone, carrying minerals downward, leaving others behind, building structure in one place, dissolving it in another. The water that falls on a forest today may not reach the deep groundwater for months or even years. It travels slowly, doing quiet work the whole way down. And by the time it arrives, it is not quite the same water that fell from the sky. And when that water finally reaches the dry earth after a long absence, something remarkable happens. The air changes. A scent rises from the ground, warm and rich and ancient. Almost everyone on Earth knows this smell. It is one of the most recognized scents in the world. But for a very long time, no one knew exactly where it came from. The smell of rain on dry earth has a name. Scientists call it petrichor. That word comes from the Greek words for stone and for the fluid said to flow in the veins of the gods. Two Australian researchers, Isabel Joy Baer and Richard Thomas, gave it that name in 1964. They had spent years studying the oils that build up in dry soil and rock. When rain falls, it releases those oils into the air as tiny droplets. The smell drifts outward, carried on the breeze, sometimes for miles before the rain even arrives. Baer and Thomas were not the first people to notice the smell. Farmers and travelers had written about it for centuries. Ancient Indian texts described it as the scent of the earth waking up. Perfumers in the 1800s tried to capture it in bottles and sell it. But no one had traced it back to its source with scientific precision until Baer and Thomas did their careful, patient work. They collected samples from rocks and soils across Australia. They heated them, tested them, and identified the oils responsible. Their 1964 paper in the journal Nature quietly changed how scientists understood the chemistry of the ground beneath our feet. One of those oils is called geosmin. It is produced by a type of soil bacteria called actinomycetes, and it is extraordinarily powerful. The human nose can detect geosmin at concentrations as low as 5 parts per trillion. That is a vanishingly small amount. To put it in perspective, it is like detecting a single drop of liquid in 20 Olympic swimming pools. Scientists believe humans evolved this sensitivity over millions of years. The smell of rain on dry earth may have helped our ancestors find water and fertile ground. Our bodies still carry that ancient knowledge, even if our minds have forgotten why. Geosmin was first isolated and identified in 1965, just 1 year after Baer and Thomas named petrichor. 2 American researchers, Nancy Gerber and Hubert Lechevalier, extracted it from soil bacteria and described its chemical structure. They noticed it was also responsible for the earthy taste sometimes found in drinking water and in freshwater fish. The same compound that rises from the forest floor after rain is the same one that gives a glass of tap water that faint mineral flavor on certain days. One molecule doing many things at once. The science of soil chemistry was slow to develop. For most of human history, farmers understood soil through touch and observation. They knew dark soil was rich. They knew sandy soil drained fast. They knew that adding manure helped crops grow. But the invisible chemistry beneath their feet remained a mystery for a very long time. It was not until the mid-1800s that scientists began to study soil as a living system rather than just a mineral one. A German chemist named Justus von Liebig helped shift that understanding. In the 1840s, he showed that plants absorb specific minerals from the soil, including nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. His work was a turning point. Farmers began to think about soil not just as dirt, but as a chemical environment that could be measured and managed. Von Liebig was not always right. He underestimated the role of organic matter and living organisms. But he opened a door, and others walked through it. The Russian scientist Vasily Dokukiv went further. the 1870s and 1880s, he traveled across the vast grasslands of Russia, digging soil pits and studying the layers he found. He was the first scientist to describe soil as a natural body with its own history, its own structure, its own life. He argued that soil was shaped by climate, by living things, by the rock beneath, and by time. His ideas became the foundation of modern soil science. He is sometimes called the father of soil science, and the honor is well earned. What these scientists discovered slowly and carefully over generations was that the ground beneath a forest is not passive. It is not simply the place where trees stand. It is a living archive, a chemical system, a world of its own. The smell of rain unlocking oils from dry earth is just one small signal from that world. A quiet message drifting upward, telling anyone who breathes it in that something ancient and alive is stirring just below the surface. Some soils are very, very old. Not old in the way a fallen log is old, or even in the way a mountain is old. Some soils carry memories that stretch back thousands, tens of thousands, even millions of years. They hold those memories quietly in their color, their chemistry, their layers. Scientists who study ancient soils have a name for them: paleosols. A paleosol is a soil that formed long ago and then got buried, preserved beneath newer layers of sediment or rock. When researchers dig down and find one, they are reading a record of a world that no longer exists. Paleosols have been found on every continent. Some are buried just a few feet below the surface. Others lie hundreds of feet down, sandwiched between layers of stone. One of the most remarkable things about them is what they can tell us. The chemistry of an ancient soil reflects the climate that shaped it, the types of minerals present, the ratio of certain elements, the traces of ancient roots and organisms pressed into the earth. All of it speaks. Scientists can look at a paleosol and say, with real confidence, that this ground once sat beneath a tropical forest, or a dry savanna, or a cold grassland swept by wind. The soil remembers the world it grew up in. Some paleosols are so well preserved that scientists have found traces of ancient root channels still intact inside them. the roots themselves are long gone, dissolved back into the earth over millions of years. But the tunnels they carved through the soil remain, like the ghost of a forest that vanished before humans ever walked the earth. In some cases, researchers have found paleosols that date back more than 400 million years, to a time before trees even existed. The organisms that built those soils were mosses, lichens, and simple plants. Yet the soils they left behind look, in many ways, like soils we recognize today. Life was already doing its slow, patient work. Here is something that surprises many people. Soil does not just record the past. It can also be much younger than the rock beneath it, yet still hold material that is extraordinarily old. Carbon in soil does not all arrive at the same time. A single handful of forest soil might contain carbon from a leaf that fell last autumn, carbon from a root that died 50 years ago, and carbon from organic matter that has been cycling through the ground for thousands of years. Scientists use a technique called radiocarbon dating to measure the age of carbon in soil samples. What they find is that deep soil layers often contain carbon that is thousands of years old. Even in forests that look perfectly ordinary from above, the ground holds time in layers, the way a river holds water from many different storms. There is another surprise buried in ancient soils. Some of them are magnetic. Certain minerals in soil, particularly iron-bearing minerals, can align themselves with the Earth's magnetic field as they form. This alignment gets locked in place over time. Scientists have used this property to track how the Earth's magnetic field has shifted and even reversed over millions of years. The soil itself becomes a compass needle pointing toward a vanished north. It is a strange and wonderful thing that the ground beneath a quiet forest carries within it a record of the planet's own magnetic history. Ancient soils also preserve pollen. Pollen grains are almost impossibly tough. Their outer walls are made of a material called sporopollenin, one of the most resistant organic substances known to science. Pollen grains can survive in soil for hundreds of thousands of years. Researchers who dig carefully through ancient soil layers can identify the pollen of plants that lived long ago, and from that, reconstruct entire ecosystems. They can tell which trees grew in a valley 10,000 years ago, which flowers bloomed along a riverbank before the last ice age ended. The soil holds all of it, grain by grain, in the dark. What makes all of this so quietly astonishing is that none of it was planned. No organism set out to create a record. The fungi and bacteria and roots and minerals simply did what they always do. They broke things down. They built things up. They moved through the earth in their slow, ceaseless way. And in doing so, they wrote a history that scientists are only now learning to read. The ground beneath a forest is not just alive in the present. It carries the past inside it, layer by layer, fact by fact, all the way down. Every step you take on soft earth is a step across something that has been remembering for a very long time. There is a place where the ground remembers even more deeply than a forest floor. It is dark and wet and very still. It smells of cold water and something ancient, something that has been slowly building for thousands of years. These are peat bogs, and they are among the most remarkable places on Earth. A peat bog forms in a very specific way. It begins where water collects and cannot drain away easily. In cool, wet climates, mosses grow thick over the surface of shallow pools and marshy ground. One type of moss, called sphagnum, is especially important. Sphagnum moss grows slowly upward, while its lower layers die and sink beneath the water. Because the water in a bog is cold, low in oxygen, and very acidic, the dead moss does not fully decay. It simply presses down, layer upon layer, compressing into a soft, dark material called peat. Peat builds slowly, very slowly. In many bogs, 1 meter of peat represents roughly 1,000 years of growth. Some bogs in northern Europe and Canada are 10 meters deep or more. That means the peat at the bottom began forming before the Great Pyramids were built, before written language spread across the ancient world. The ground you might stand on at the edge of a bog is younger than the ground just a few steps beneath your feet by thousands of years. What makes peat bogs so connected to the larger story of the planet is what they hold inside. Because decay is so slow in these cold, acidic conditions, peat bogs preserve things with extraordinary care. Pollen grains survive here, just as they do in forest soils. But peat bogs also preserve wood, seeds, leaves, and even the bodies of animals and people. Researchers have found human remains in European peat bogs that are more than 2,000 years old, with skin and hair still intact. The bog did not destroy them. It held them in quiet suspension, like a slow and patient keeper of the past. Peat bogs cover roughly 3% of Earth's land surface. That sounds small, but the amount of carbon stored inside them is enormous. Scientists estimate that peat bogs hold more carbon than all the world's forests combined. Carbon that once floated in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide was pulled down by plants, built into leaves and stems, and then slowly locked away in the peat as those plants died and compressed over millennia. The bog became a carbon vault, sealing away what the living world no longer needed. This connects peat bogs directly to the climate. When bogs are healthy and wet, they hold their carbon quietly. But when they dry out, or when people cut into them to harvest peat as fuel, that stored carbon escapes back into the air. A bog that took 10,000 years to build can release its carbon in a matter of decades. The ancient and the present are always in conversation, even when we cannot hear it. Peat bogs also connect to the water cycle in a deep way. Sphagnum moss can hold up to 20 times its own weight in water. A healthy bog acts like a giant sponge, absorbing rainfall and releasing it slowly into streams and rivers. In this way, bogs help regulate the flow of water across entire regions. They slow floods. They keep rivers running during dry spells. They feed the ground around them with a steady, quiet release. The animals and plants that live in bogs are specially adapted to this strange world. Carnivorous plants like sundews and pitcher plants grow in bogs because the water is so low in nutrients that they must catch insects to survive. Rare orchids bloom in the soft, mossy margins. Dragonflies hover over dark water. Bog pools reflect the sky like dark mirrors, still and smooth, and very old-looking. All of this connects back to the soil story that has been unfolding through this entire episode. The forest floor breaks things down and builds them back up. The bog slows that process almost to a stop. Together, they represent two different rhythms within the same system. One fast, one slow. One that cycles carbon in decades. One that holds it for 10,000 years. Both are necessary. Both are part of how the planet keeps itself in balance. The Earth does not work in just one speed. It works in many speeds at once, all of them running together, all of them adding up to something stable and enduring. The peat bog is the slow heartbeat beneath the faster pulse of the living forest. And both of them, in their own quiet way, are keeping time. Beneath the forests and the bogs, beneath the meadows and the mountains, the soil story does not stop at the shoreline. It keeps going. It slides down river deltas, drifts through coastal waters, and settles slowly onto the floor of the ocean. The ground beneath the sea is not bare rock. It is covered in sediment, a soft, fine layer of material that has been falling through the water for millions of years, and in many ways, it behaves like soil. This ocean sediment forms in layers, just like the soil horizons you find on land. The top layer is the youngest. The deepest layers are ancient beyond imagination. Scientists drill down into ocean sediment the same way they drill into ice cores or peat bogs, pulling up cylinders of material that hold a record of everything the ocean has experienced. Each layer tells a story. A warm period, a cold period, a mass extinction, a volcanic eruption on the other side of the world. The ocean floor is one of the most detailed record keepers on the planet. Much of this sediment comes from land. Rivers carry tiny particles of rock, clay, and organic matter from forests and fields and mountains all the way to the sea. The Amazon River alone carries hundreds of millions of tons of sediment into the Atlantic Ocean every single year. That sediment fans out across the seafloor in a vast, slow-spreading deposit called the Amazon fan. The soil of the rainforest, broken down over centuries, eventually becomes part of the ocean floor. The forest and the deep sea are connected in ways that are easy to miss, but impossible to overstate. Some ocean sediment comes from above, not from the land. Tiny creatures called foraminifera, which are single-celled organisms no bigger than a grain of sand, live in the upper layers of the ocean. When they die, their small shells drift downward through the water column. This falling rain of shells is called marine snow. It descends slowly, taking days or even weeks to reach the bottom. Over millions of years, these shells pile up into thick layers of a soft white material called chalk. The white cliffs of Dover in England are made of this ancient marine sediment, lifted above the sea by the slow movement of tectonic plates. What was once ocean floor is now a cliff face, bright in the morning sun, hundreds of feet above the water. The organisms that live in ocean sediment are not so different from the ones that live in forest soil. Bacteria break down organic matter on the seafloor just as they do on land. Tiny worms and crustaceans move through the sediment, mixing it, aerating it, the same way earthworms work through the topsoil of a forest. Scientists call this process bioturbation, which simply means that living things are stirring the sediment. Without it, the layers would stay perfectly still and perfectly separate. With it, nutrients cycle, carbon moves, the seafloor stays alive. In some parts of the ocean, the sediment is very thin. Near mid-ocean ridges, where new seafloor is constantly being created by volcanic activity, the rock is young and the sediment layer has not had much time to build up. But in the deep, quiet basins far from any ridge, the sediment can be several kilometers thick. It has been accumulating for so long, so patiently, that it dwarfs anything you would find on land. The oldest ocean sediment ever recovered by scientists is around 170 million years old. The oldest land soil, by comparison, is far younger. The ocean is a more patient keeper of the past. One of the most striking things about ocean sediment is how much carbon it holds. Just like peat bogs on land, the deep seafloor stores enormous amounts of carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere when organic matter sinks to the bottom and gets buried under layers of sediment. That carbon is locked away. It may stay there for tens of millions of years. This process, called the biological carbon pump, is one of the reasons the Earth's climate has remained stable enough for complex life to exist. The ocean floor is not just a resting place. It is an active part of how the planet regulates itself. The soil beneath your feet and the sediment beneath the sea are part of the same long conversation. Material moves from mountains to rivers to ocean floors. Carbon cycles from forests to water to deep sediment and back again. The planet is always shifting its weight, always redistributing what it has, always finding a new kind of balance. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is truly still. Even the deepest, darkest, most silent places on Earth are quietly, patiently doing their part. Now think about a place where the sun is everything, where there is almost no shade, no soft carpet of leaves, no earthworm moving through cool, damp earth. Think about the desert, vast and open and blazing with light. It looks empty at first, but the ground beneath a desert sky holds its own quiet kind of life. And the way light shapes that ground is one of the most beautiful things in all of earth science. Desert soils are unlike any other soil on the planet. They are thin. They are dry. They hold very little organic matter, which is the broken down remains of living things that give most soils their richness and dark color. Without much rain, and without thick forests dropping leaves every autumn, desert soils never build up the deep, soft layers you find in a woodland. They stay pale, sandy, gritty. In the bright desert sun, they almost glow. That pale color is not just beautiful to look at. It tells a story. Dark soils are dark because they are full of carbon-rich organic matter. Light soils are light because they are not. Desert soils are often tan, cream, or pale orange because they are made mostly of mineral particles, tiny grains of rock and sand that have been broken down over thousands of years. Iron in those minerals can give the soil a warm reddish tone, the kind of deep rust red you see in the American Southwest or the Australian outback. That red is iron oxide, the same chemistry that makes rust on metal. The desert is, in a way, slowly rusting. But here is where the light becomes something truly special. In many many deserts around the world, the surface of the soil is not just loose sand. It is covered by a thin, fragile crust. Scientists call this a biological soil crust, sometimes shortened to biocrust. This crust is alive. It is made of tiny organisms, cyanobacteria, mosses, lichens, and fungi, all woven together into a thin skin that sits right on top of the desert floor. From a distance, it looks like the ground is just dark and rough. Up close, it is a miniature world. Biocrusts do something remarkable. They hold the desert together. Without them, the surface soil would blow away in the wind or wash off in the rare but powerful desert rainstorms. The tiny threads of cyanobacteria, which are among the oldest forms of life on Earth, bind the soil particles together the way roots bind soil in a forest. They are the desert's answer to the problem of holding on. Light plays a direct role in how biocrusts work. These organisms use sunlight to grow and to fix nitrogen, which means they pull nitrogen gas from the air and convert it into a form that plants can use. In a place where nutrients are scarce, biocrusts are one of the only ways the soil gets fed. They are quiet, slow, and almost invisible, but they are essential. The tragedy is that biocrusts are extraordinarily fragile. A single footstep can destroy a section of crust that took decades to form. Off-road vehicles crossing desert land can wipe out biocrusts across huge areas. Once broken, the crust may take 50 years or more to recover. The desert looks tough. It looks like nothing could hurt it, but its skin is delicate. Light also shapes something called desert varnish, a dark, shiny coating that forms on the surface of rocks in dry environments. Desert varnish is made of clay minerals, iron, and manganese, and it builds up over thousands of years as wind-blown dust settles on rock surfaces and reacts with moisture and sunlight. Ancient peoples carved through desert varnish to make petroglyphs, rock art that is still visible today because the varnish preserved the stone beneath it. The desert holds memory in its own quiet way. At dawn, desert soils catch the low, angled light in a way that makes the whole ground seem to shimmer. The pale sand reflects the orange and pink of the early sky. The biocrust patches look almost purple in that soft morning glow. The rust-red iron minerals warm slowly as the sun rises. Everything is still. Everything is dry. And yet the ground is doing its work. The crust is gathering light. The minerals are slowly breaking down. The rare seeds buried in the sand are waiting for a rain that may not come for months. The desert is not empty. It is patient. It has learned to do more with less than almost any other place on earth. And the soil beneath it, thin and pale and ancient, is proof that life finds a way even where the sun takes almost everything away. Beneath some of the most fertile ground on earth, there is fire. Not the slow, patient chemistry of desert sand or the quiet work of fallen leaves. Something older, something that began deep underground, where rock melts and pressure builds until the earth can no longer hold it. Volcanoes have shaped the soil of this planet for hundreds of millions of years, and the ground they leave behind is some of the richest, darkest, most generous soil anywhere. Volcanic soil has a name. Scientists call it andesol. It forms from the ash and broken rock that volcanoes release when they erupt. That ash is not like the ash from a fire. It is made of tiny glass-like particles of minerals, ground fine by the force of the explosion and carried by wind across enormous distances. When that ash settles on the ground and begins to break down over hundreds or thousands of years, it becomes something remarkable. It becomes soil that holds water like a sponge and grips nutrients so tightly that plants can draw on them for a very long time. There is a sound to all of this if you listen in the right way. Deep beneath a volcano, magma moves through channels in the rock. Scientists use instruments called seismometers to detect the vibrations that movement creates. Those vibrations are too low for human ears to hear on their own. But when researchers speed up the recordings, the result is something between a low rumble and a slow, grinding groan. It sounds almost like a living thing breathing. Some volcanoes produce a steady hum that scientists call harmonic tremor, a long, sustained vibration that pulses through the ground for hours or even days before an eruption. The earth is not silent. It is speaking in a frequency we had to learn to translate. Above ground, an erupting volcano makes sounds that need no translation at all. The crack and boom of an explosion can travel hundreds of miles. The hiss of steam where lava meets the ocean is sharp and constant, like a pressure valve releasing. Lava itself, as it cools and hardens into rock, makes a soft ticking sound as the surface contracts. Each of these sounds is part of the same process that eventually, over long stretches of time, produces the dark, rich soil that farmers and forests depend on. Some of the most productive farmland on Earth sits on volcanic soil. The island of Java in Indonesia is home to more than 150 million people, and much of that population is fed by crops grown in andesol, built up from the many volcanoes that run along the island's spine. The same is true in parts of Italy near Mount Etna, in Hawaii, in the Pacific Northwest of North America. People have always known, even before they understood the chemistry, that the ground near volcanoes grows things well. They stayed close to the fire because the soil made it worth the risk. The reason volcanic soil is so fertile comes down to minerals. When magma cools and breaks apart, it releases elements like phosphorus, calcium, potassium, and iron in forms that plants can use. These are the same minerals that living things need to build cells and grow. Volcanic ash spreads those minerals across wide areas, sometimes coating the ground for hundreds of miles around an eruption. A single large eruption can deposit a thin layer of nutrient-rich ash across an entire region, quietly improving the soil for generations of plants and animals that will never know where that gift came from. There is something worth sitting with in that idea. A volcano erupts. It is loud and violent, and it destroys everything nearby. And then, slowly, over decades and centuries, the ground around it becomes more alive than almost anywhere else. The destruction and the gift are the same event, just seen from different distances in time. The forest that grows back on volcanic slopes is often dense and green and full of life, fed by the very rock that once buried it. Volcanic soils also hold carbon. Like many rich soils, andesols trap organic matter and keep it stable for long periods. The same mineral chemistry that grips nutrients also grips the carbon that living things leave behind when they die. This means volcanic soils are not only feeding forests today, they are also quietly storing some of the carbon those forests pull from the air. The deep rumble beneath a volcano is the sound of the planet doing what it has always done: building, breaking, giving back. The dark soil on the surface is the end of a very long story that began with fire and pressure and the slow, grinding movement of rock. It is the Earth's way of turning destruction into something that grows. A forest is a giving thing. It takes from the sun and the rain and the air, and then, quietly, it gives almost all of it back to the ground beneath its feet. The numbers behind this process are simple and stunning. A single mature tree can drop somewhere between 200 and 500 pounds of leaves in one autumn season. One tree. Now picture a forest with thousands of trees, all releasing their leaves at the same time, all sending that weight drifting down to the forest floor in slow, spinning spirals of gold and brown and rust. The ground receives this gift every year without fail. It has been receiving it for millions of years. That fallen material is called litter. Not trash, but the technical word scientists use for the layer of dead leaves, broken twigs, seed casings, and bark that covers the forest floor. In a healthy, temperate forest, that litter layer can be several inches deep. In a tropical rainforest, it barely builds up at all because the warmth and moisture break it down so fast. The forest consumes its own gifts almost as quickly as they arrive. Here is where the math becomes beautiful. Scientists have measured how much organic matter, the carbon-rich material from living things, a forest returns to its soil each year. In a temperate forest, that number is often around 2 to 4 tons per acre per year. 2 to 4 tons of leaves and wood and roots and the bodies of small creatures. All of it cycling back into the ground. All of it becoming the dark, rich soil that feeds the next generation of trees. Roots are part of this equation too, and their contribution is easy to underestimate. A tree's roots do not just hold it upright. They grow, branch, and then die constantly. fine roots, the thin hair-like tips that absorb water and nutrients, live for only a few weeks or months before they die and decompose. Scientists estimate that in some forests, fine root turnover, the constant dying and replacing of these tiny roots, contributes as much organic matter to the soil as the leaves falling from above. The forest feeds its ground from the top and from the bottom, all at once. There is a ratio that appears in this system, quiet and steady. Soil scientists measure something called the carbon to nitrogen ratio in soil and in the material being broken down. Leaves and wood tend to have a high ratio, meaning lots of carbon and relatively little nitrogen. Bacteria and fungi prefer material with a lower ratio. So when fresh leaves fall, the decomposers work through them slowly at first, pulling out what they need, adjusting the chemistry. Over time, the ratio narrows. The material becomes more balanced, more useful. The math of decay is the math of transformation, always moving toward something the soil can use. Water follows its own elegant numbers through this system. A healthy forest floor, thick with litter and threaded with fungal networks and root channels, can absorb rain at a rate many times faster than bare soil. Some studies show that a well-structured forest floor can soak up water 10 times faster than compacted ground with no organic layer. That water moves slowly downward, filtered through layers of organic matter, arriving in streams and aquifers clean and cold. The forest is not just feeding itself, it is also managing water for everything downstream. The trees even measure their own output in a kind of chemical language. When a tree sheds its leaves in autumn, it first pulls back the most valuable nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, drawing them down into the branches and trunk before the leaf falls. The leaf that lands on the ground is already partly spent. The tree has kept what it needs and given the rest away. This process is called nutrient resorption, and in some tree species, it recovers more than half of the nitrogen from each leaf before it drops. The forest is efficient in a way that no factory has ever matched. All of these numbers, the tons of litter, the ratios of carbon to nitrogen, the speed of water absorption, the percentage of nutrients reclaimed, point to the same quiet truth. A forest does not deplete its ground. It builds it, slowly, steadily, across decades and centuries. The forest makes its own soil richer. It is a system that improves itself over time, that turns every fallen thing into future life. The ground beneath an old forest is not just dirt. It is the accumulated record of every leaf that ever fell there, every root that ever died, every creature that ever returned to the earth. It is the forest's memory, written in dark and living soil. And living within that memory right now are creatures so small and so numerous that most people never think to look for them. The leaf litter on a forest floor is not simply a mat of dead material waiting to be broken down. It is a world, a dense, layered, breathing world full of animals going about their lives in the dark and the damp, just beneath your feet. Consider the mite. These tiny creatures, related to spiders, are among the most abundant animals on Earth. In a single square meter of healthy forest floor, scientists have counted more than 100,000 individual mites. That is not a misprint. 1 square meter, 100,000 animals. They move through the litter like slow traffic, grazing on fungi, chewing on dead plant material, hunting even smaller creatures. Some species are so small they live inside the spaces between soil particles, in gaps no wider than a human hair. Alongside the mites live the springtails. These are tiny, wingless insects, rarely longer than 2 millimeters, that carry a small forked structure folded beneath their bodies. When threatened, they release that fork against the ground and launch themselves into the air. It is one of the fastest movements in the animal kingdom, relative to body size. A springtail can jump 100 times its own body length in a fraction of a second, and yet most people have never seen one. There may be 100,000 springtails in that same square meter of leaf litter, living alongside the mites, eating fungi and bacteria and the soft tissue of decaying leaves. These two groups alone, the mites and the springtails, make up a huge portion of what scientists call the mesofauna. The medium-sized soil animals, too small to see easily, but too large to be called microbes. They are the middle layer of the soil food web, eating the bacteria and fungi below them, and being eaten by the larger predators above. Without them, decomposition would slow dramatically. Leaves would pile up. Nutrients would stay locked inside dead tissue instead of returning to the soil. The whole system depends on their quiet, constant work. Larger animals move through the litter too. Centipedes hunt at night, pressing their flat bodies through narrow gaps between leaves, chasing down mites and springtails and small worms. Some forest centipedes are only a centimeter long. Others grow much larger. All of them are predators, and all of them play a role in keeping the smaller populations in check. Without predators, any one species could grow too large in number and throw the system off balance. This is the fragile part. Every creature in the leaf litter depends on precise conditions. Temperature matters. Moisture matters. The chemistry of the leaves matters. When the balance shifts, even slightly, the effects move through the whole system. A dry autumn can reduce the mite population. A reduction in mites can slow fungal grazing. Slower fungal grazing means slower decomposition. Slower decomposition means fewer nutrients returned to the soil. And fewer nutrients in the soil means the trees above grow a little less well the following spring. One small change ripples outward in every direction. Scientists have found that the diversity of species in leaf litter is just as important as the number of individuals. A litter community with many different species breaks down leaves faster and more completely than one with fewer species doing the same total work. Each species handles a slightly different part of the leaf, or works at a slightly different depth, or thrives in slightly different moisture conditions. Together, they cover every possibility. Alone, each one would leave gaps. This is what makes the forest floor so remarkable and so easy to damage. It is not a simple system. It is a finely tuned community built over long stretches of time, where every species fills a role that no other species fills in quite the same way. Remove the centipedes, and the mite population swells. Remove the mites, and the fungi grow unchecked. Drain the moisture, and the springtails vanish. Each thread holds others in place. The leaf litter looks like nothing from above, brown and soft and still. But press your hand gently into it and feel the warmth. That warmth is biological. It comes from millions of small bodies working, breathing, moving, eating, and being eaten. It comes from the slow chemical fire of decomposition. It comes from life, dense and layered and ancient, doing what it has always done. The forest does not just grow upward into the light. It grows downward into the dark. And in that dark, in the damp and the warmth of the litter, the most important work of the forest quietly continues. Soil breathes. That is not a metaphor. The ground beneath a forest actually exchanges gases with the air above it, pulling in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide in a slow, constant rhythm. Scientists call this soil respiration, and it happens every hour of every day in every forest on Earth. The organisms living in the soil, the bacteria, the fungi, the worms, the beetles, all of them consume oxygen and release carbon dioxide as they work. The soil itself exhales. What scientists are still working to understand is exactly how much. Soil releases enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere each year. Current estimates suggest that the world's soils release somewhere between 8 and 10 times more carbon dioxide annually than all of humanity's fossil fuel burning combined. That number is not a cause for alarm on its own. Forests and plants absorb much of that carbon back through photosynthesis. The system has been in rough balance for a very long time. But the precise details of that balance, how much goes out, how much comes back in, and what tips the scale, remain one of the most active areas of research in all of earth science. One of the great open questions is how warming temperatures will change this exchange. When soil gets warmer, the microbes inside it become more active. They work faster. They break down organic matter more quickly. And as they do, they release more carbon dioxide. Scientists have observed this in laboratory experiments and in field studies. But what happens over decades in real forests under real conditions is harder to predict. Some research suggests that soil microbes may eventually adapt to warmer temperatures and slow their output. Other research suggests the opposite. The honest answer is that we do not yet know which effect will win out, or when. There is another mystery buried even deeper. Soil holds more carbon than all of Earth's plants and atmosphere combined. That carbon is locked inside dead organic matter, ancient roots, and the bodies of organisms that lived and died over thousands of years. Much of it sits in deep layers of soil that scientists are only beginning to study carefully. For a long time, researchers focused on the top layers, where most of the biological activity happens. But recent work has shown that deep soil carbon, sitting meters below the surface, may be far more vulnerable to disturbance than anyone realized. Dig it up, drain it, or warm it, and that ancient carbon can begin to move. Peat soils, which you may remember from an earlier part of this journey through the ground, hold some of the oldest and most concentrated carbon stores on the planet. But even ordinary forest soils contain carbon that has been locked away for hundreds of years. Scientists are still mapping where these stores are, how stable they are, and what conditions might cause them to release. It is painstaking work, done one soil core at a time, in forests and grasslands and wetlands all over the world. There is also the question of nitrous oxide. Soil does not only release carbon dioxide, it also releases nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas far more potent than carbon dioxide over short time periods. Certain bacteria in the soil produce nitrous oxide as a byproduct of their normal chemistry. Wet soils produce more of it. Soils with high nitrogen content produce more of it. Exactly how much the world's soils release and how that changes with land use and climate is still being calculated. The numbers matter enormously for understanding how Earth's atmosphere will change in the coming decades. What makes all of this so remarkable is that the answers lie right beneath our feet, in a material most people walk over without a second thought. The ground is not inert. It is not simple. It is a living, breathing, chemically active layer of the planet that has been quietly shaping the atmosphere for hundreds of millions of years. Long before there were forests, microbial mats in ancient soils were already exchanging gases with the air. The relationship between ground and sky is older than trees. Scientists working in this field often describe a feeling of standing at the edge of something vast. They have learned an enormous amount in the last century. The tools available today, from DNA sequencing to satellite imaging to isotope tracing, allow researchers to see things in soil that were completely invisible a generation ago. And yet, the more they look, the more they find they do not know. Every answer opens new questions. Every soil sample contains organisms that have never been named. The ground keeps its secrets carefully, but slowly, patiently, the science of soil is learning to listen. And yet, for all that science is learning, there is a quieter story unfolding at the same time. Soil is disappearing, not in some distant future. Right now, today, healthy topsoil is being lost far faster than it can form. Farmers, scientists, and land managers around the world are watching it happen. And the numbers are sobering. It takes nature roughly 500 to 1,000 years to build just 1 inch of healthy topsoil. In some places, that same inch can wash away in a single heavy rainstorm if the land has been stripped of its plants and roots. This process is called soil erosion. It happens when wind or water carries loose soil away from the surface. Roots normally hold soil in place. Trees, grasses, and ground cover act like a net, weaving through the upper layers and anchoring them down. When those plants are removed, the soil has nothing to hold on to. It lifts, it flows, it goes. Every year, the world loses an estimated 75 billion tons of soil to erosion. That figure is almost too large to picture. Imagine the weight of millions of mountains, quietly carried away by rivers and wind, settling into the ocean floors or blowing across continents as fine brown dust. Some of that dust travels thousands of miles. Saharan sand regularly drifts across the Atlantic Ocean and lands in the Amazon rainforest, carrying minerals that actually feed those distant trees. Even in loss, there is connection. But the Amazon receiving Saharan dust is a small exchange compared to what is being lost on farmland across the globe. Agricultural soil, the kind that grows the food that feeds billions of people, is among the most threatened. When forests are cleared and fields are plowed season after season without rest, the soil loses its structure. The tiny air pockets collapse. The fungi networks break apart. The bacteria communities shrink. What was once a rich, dark, living material slowly becomes pale, thin, and hard. Scientists call this soil degradation. It does not happen all at once. It creeps. A field that once grew tall wheat with ease begins to need more and more fertilizer just to produce the same harvest. The soil is still there, technically, but it has lost much of what made it alive. Now look further ahead. In 1,000 years, if the warming of the planet continues on its current path, large regions of soil face a different kind of threat. Permafrost, the frozen ground that covers nearly a quarter of the land in the northern hemisphere, is thawing. Permafrost is soil that has stayed frozen for thousands of years, sometimes tens of thousands. It holds an enormous amount of carbon locked inside it, the remains of ancient plants and animals that never fully decomposed because the ground was too cold. As that ground warms and thaws, those ancient materials begin to break down at last. And as they break down, they release carbon dioxide and methane into the air. Methane is a gas that traps heat in the atmosphere roughly 80 times more effectively than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. The thawing of permafrost could release more greenhouse gases than all the cars and factories on Earth combined, if it proceeds unchecked. Scientists are watching this process with great care and real concern. And yet, even here, the story is not only one of loss. Soil has recovered before. After the great volcanic eruptions that have periodically reshaped this planet, bare rock eventually became forest floor again. After the ice ages scraped continents clean, life crept back, slowly, patiently, building new soil from scratch. Mosses came first, then grasses, then shrubs, then trees. Each generation of life added a little more organic matter to the ground. Each layer of decay became the foundation for the next. The planet has a long memory for recovery. Given time and the right conditions, soil rebuilds itself. The organisms that build it, the bacteria, bacteria, the fungi, the worms, the beetles, the mites, are still here. They are waiting in every patch of undisturbed ground. They are ready to begin again, wherever they are given the chance. In 1,000,000 years, the continents will have shifted. New mountain ranges may have risen. Old ones will have worn down to gentle hills. The soil that forms on those future slopes will be built by organisms descended from the ones alive today, doing the same slow, patient work their ancestors have always done. The ground keeps being lost. The ground keeps being made. These two forces have always existed together. The question, the one that matters most right now, is simply which force we choose to help along. There is something quietly astonishing about a burned forest. Stand at the edge of one just after the fire has passed. The ground is black. The trees are bare and gray. The air smells of ash. It looks, at first, like nothing could ever return. But look closer at the soil beneath your feet. Even in that scorched earth, life is already stirring. Within days of a forest fire, the first organisms begin to move. Certain fungi push up through the ash almost immediately. Some species of morel mushrooms, in fact, fruit in great numbers the spring after a fire. Scientists believe they respond to chemical signals released by the burning wood. The ash itself is rich in minerals. Potassium, calcium, phosphorus, all of it released from the wood and returned directly to the soil. A fire does not only destroy, it also gives back. The first plants to return after a fire are often called pioneer species. These are the tough, early arrivals. Fireweed is one of the most famous. It grows tall and bright pink, sometimes covering entire hillsides in color within a single season. Its roots break up the compacted, burned soil. Its leaves fall and begin to decay. And with that first thin layer of organic matter, the ground begins its long climb back to life. Insects arrive next. Beetles that are drawn specifically to burned would move in quickly. They lay their eggs beneath the charred bark of fallen trees. Their larvae tunnel through the wood, breaking it down further. Woodpeckers follow the beetles. Small mammals follow the insects. Each new arrival changes the conditions just enough to welcome the next. This is what ecologists call succession. The slow, orderly process by which a disturbed place rebuilds its community of life, one layer at a time. Within a decade, shrubs take hold. Within a few decades, young trees begin to rise. The soil deepens. The fungi spread their networks through the growing root systems. The earthworms return. The mites and springtails and nematodes fill the leaf litter again. What looked like total destruction becomes, given enough time, a young and thriving forest once more. This process has played out across the planet for hundreds of millions of years. Long before humans existed, forests burned and grew back. Glaciers scraped the land bare, and life returned behind them as the ice retreated. Volcanoes buried entire landscapes under lava, and within centuries, new soil began to form on the hardened rock. The planet has rehearsed recovery so many times that the organisms living in soil today carry, in a sense, the memory of every previous recovery. They are shaped by it. They are built for it. Scientists who study forest recovery have found something remarkable. When a forest regrows after disturbance, the soil often rebuilds faster if even small patches of the original forest remain nearby. Those patches act as a source. Fungi send their threads outward into the recovering ground. Seeds fall from the surviving trees. Earthworms move slowly into the new soil from the edges. The recovery of a forest is not a solo effort. It is a community effort, spreading outward from every surviving fragment. This is why ecologists work so hard to protect old-growth forests, forests that have never been cleared, where the soil is deep and ancient and full of organisms that took centuries to establish. These places are not just beautiful. They are living seed banks for the future. They hold the organisms and the networks that a recovering forest needs. They are the starting point from which new forests can grow, and the scale of what forests can do once they return is staggering. A mature forest pulls carbon from the air and stores it in its wood and in its soil. It holds water in the ground and releases it slowly into streams. It cools the air around it. It shelters thousands of species. All of that begins with soil, with the slow, patient work of bacteria fungi and worms, with the quiet accumulation of fallen leaves, with the invisible chemistry happening just beneath your feet. The forest does not need to be asked to grow back. It simply does whenever it is given the chance. The organisms that build soil are ancient and persistent. They have survived ice ages and mass extinctions and volcanic winters. They are still here. They are in the ground right now, in forests and meadows, and even in the cracks of city sidewalks, doing what they have always done. The ground keeps being lost, and the ground keeps coming back. It has been doing this for longer than we can fully imagine, and it is not finished yet. And so we arrive here, at the end of this long and quiet walk through the ground beneath our feet. We have traveled through layers of rock ground down over millions of years. We have visited the dark, tangled world of fungi and the slow, steady work of earthworms. We have watched leaves fall and dissolve and become something new. We have seen how water moves through soil like a slow breath, how ancient bogs hold the memory of whole climates, how desert crusts hold entire living communities in a skin thinner than paper. We have learned that the ground is not simply dirt. It is the most complex living system on the surface of this planet, and it connects everything. Every tree you have ever stood beneath was built from soil. Every apple, every grain of wheat, every blade of grass, every forest that has ever grown and fallen and grown again, every river that runs clear and cold through a mountain valley. All of it begins in that quiet, dark layer just beneath the surface. Soil is not the background to life on Earth. It is the foundation that life is built upon. Scientists estimate that a single teaspoon of healthy soil holds more living organisms than there are people on Earth. Billions of bacteria, thousands of fungi, countless tiny creatures moving through the dark, all of them working, breaking things down, building things up, passing energy from one form to the next. This is not a small thing happening in a hidden place. This is one of the great engines of the living world, running silently beneath every forest and field, the soil beneath a temperate forest, the kind with oak and maple and beech, can take thousands of years to reach full depth and richness. Each centimeter built slowly, patiently, from the work of generations of organisms that lived and died and gave themselves back to the ground. The soil we walk on today is the result of processes that began long before any human being ever stood on this planet. It is ancient, it is generous, and it asks for very little. What it asks for is time, and the chance to do what it has always done. Right now, somewhere in the world, a forest is quietly rebuilding. Fungi are threading through the soil, connecting roots, sharing water and nutrients between trees. Earthworms are pulling dead leaves down into the dark. Bacteria are breaking apart the last fragments of last autumn's fallen wood. The ground is alive, and it is working. And it has been working like this for hundreds of millions of years. The first land plants appeared on Earth roughly 470 million years ago. As they spread across the bare rock of the ancient continents, they began to build soil. Their roots broke stone. Their bodies, when they died, added the first thin layers of organic matter, the dark, rich material made from once living things, to the ground. Over millions of years, that thin layer grew. Soil spread, and as soil spread, more complex plants could grow. And as more complex plants grew, more animals could live. The whole explosion of life on land, every forest and meadow and wetland that has ever existed, traces back to that first thin skin of living ground. We are part of that story. Every one of us. The calcium in your bones was once in soil. The iron in your blood was once in a plant that pulled it from the ground. The food that built every cell in your body passed through soil on its way to you. You are, in a very real and literal sense, made of the earth, and when your time comes, you will return to it. The same organisms that break down a fallen leaf will, one day, break down everything that was you and pass it back into the ground, where it will become part of something new. That is not a sad thought. It is one of the most peaceful ones there is. You are part of a system that has been running for longer than the mind can hold. A system that is patient and persistent and quietly magnificent. The ground beneath you is alive. The world around you is alive. And it is all, in ways both seen and unseen, connected. So tonight, as you drift toward toward sleep, let the thought settle gently over you. Somewhere out there, under moonlight and starlight, a forest floor is breathing. Leaves are slowly becoming soil. Roots are reaching through the dark. The planet is doing what it has always done, and it is doing it for you too. Subscribe for a brand new Earth topic every night. One tap, and something wonderful is waiting for you tomorrow. Sweet dreams.